On June 28, 1969, the Stonewall riots began when New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn, a local gay club. This raid fueled 6 days of protests and fights among hundreds of people near the club.
On April 2, 1974, Kathy Kozachenko, an out lesbian, was elected to the Ann Arbor City Council in Michigan, making her the first openly LGBT person to be elected to public office in the country. Some of the people we interviewed also made history by being the first LGBT politicians to be elected in their state or local governments.
To become the first LGBTQ council member in Montgomery County. It has allowed me to continue pushing for an equal rights and fair treatment platform.
Before I was out, we had several bills in the 2006 through 2009 sessions that I was seen as a liberal Republican. How dare I could, be rallying against some of those bills, and I took some hits for it politically.
I was the first LGBT mayor of any top 10 U.S. city. After 12 years in office, very mainstream politician, that when I ran for mayor, people said that it was impossible for me to be elected.
On June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court announced the verdict for Obergefell v. Hodges in a 5-4 decision that the fundamental right to marry is guaranteed to same-sex couples by the 14th Amendment.
But today we can say that we've made our union a little more perfect.
The LGBTQ+ movement has historically faced and currently still faces a great deal of opposition and hatred.
So the realities, as I said, are that trans and non-binary people have not been traditionally invited to the table.
People of different sexual orientations are continually subject to vicious acrimony by people who claim to be allied with the Almighty.
The underlying reason why the gay marriage is being pursued is the left wing's agenda of destroying the institution of marriage.
I think for the overall health of the movement, to really get that kind of social equality throughout the country, the movement needs to come back and focus on Republicans and conservatives and saying, hey, freedom is freedom for everyone.
Civil rights shouldn't be a Republican or Democratic issue. Civil rights shouldn't be a partisan issue at all.
In 2021, we want to see the new administration elect and appoint more queer individuals to office.
I think growing up as a queer person in the US and in Montgomery County, I didn't necessarily see myself represented within activist spaces and within the things I learned about and the community that I lived in. I would frequently notice that we would want to talk about diversity when we'd want to talk about inclusion, and we would be either excluding or simply ignoring the voices of LGBTQ+ people.
I think the consequence is always, if you don't have people who represent a greater diversity of opinion, you don't get laws that affect that diversity of opinion.
Putting one person in a legislature doesn't change the outcome. It changes the conversation.
Another issue is the lack of LGBTQ+ history education, as well as protections for the LGBTQ+ youth within our schools.
It's going to be a really consistent trend that when you talk about LGBTQ+ experience at school, you tend to have less levels of bullying for all students. We see that when there's a lack of these things, LGBTQ+ experiences are made to be something that are denormalized.
For me, I also want to see the President and Congress invest deeply in K-12 education.
We successfully got it passed in April of having the country's first standardized LGBTQ+ studies course for high schoolers.
When we learn about our history, it informs where we're going to go.
In 2021, we want to see the new Congress ban the panic defense nationally and introduce legal protections to maintain equal rights.
What needs to be made completely explicit and very, very clear is something like the Equality Act, which would simply write into federal law explicitly that LGBTQ people cannot be discriminated against on the basis of who they are.
The Equality Act ensures that LGBTQ women and girls who are lesbian, bisexual, or transgender will all have the same opportunities as their peers.
Earlier this year, by the Bostock and Stevens litigation that held that sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination are prohibited under that really important civil rights law known as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of '64.
But there needs to be some kind of system of monitoring that, of having complaints against that.
The so-called panic defense is a kind of a legal mechanism, and this happens when a defendant harms, they assaults, and sometimes even murder an LGBTQ person, and then they claim that they did that they had a panic reaction when they discovered the victim was LGBTQ, right?
There needs to also be greater protections, both at the state level in banning things like trans and gay panic, and also at the national level in ensuring that we continue to have discrimination-free institutions, discrimination-free workplaces, and discrimination-free lifestyles.